What's been interesting for us is that 2 decades we were practitioners in running our company better. In the last decade, we emphasized and spent time giving and sharing this knowledge, teaching. And teaching is the highest form of learning because it shows you everything you don't know. And when you try to teach to help organizations of all types and all sizes globally learn these things and try, it moves from very jargony terms to things that have to work in bigger scale. And so a decade of teaching has helped refine, and what we've condensed here over the next hour or two is everything we have known and learned to date working with other organizations packed into this. So not to set the expectation too high, but this is the sum of all those learnings packed in, because the beauty of having, I think you saw in the tour, Business 2, which is a social movement, which means we never go into other organizations and have tried to bill more hours or charge more fees. We focus on getting to the real meat fast. So it doesn't matter how many stars you have or what title you are, we don't care. We want to make a difference. If we can't, we're out of here. And that benefit has allowed us to learn more faster and learn the common threads of challenges everyone's facing. So that's what we packed in. We'll talk about this 21st century, the information age, which technically started as of 2001. We're roughly, I guess, 17 years or so into the 21st century, yet the old model has actually worked well enough for the first 15 years. The first 15% of this new century, this information age, the old model still was able to pay off and work well enough. But we'll go into more of what David Rose said, which is, if you succeeded before, you're quickly finding you don't succeed now. And most people are trying to figure out what is wrong and what is different. I'm sure you've heard that common phrase of leaders saying, this always worked. This is the way we always did it, always worked, but somehow it's not true anymore. And if that isn't true, you'll see it come true very quick. There is a term you'll hear a lot, TP. The origins of TP started with toilet paper. You take each other's shit. That's how it started. Then we went to talking partners, and everyone went to like just the talk. Training partner. You think of any successful organizational design, you'll find a buddy system. You want to go learn how to get fit, you need a gym buddy. You want to go learn how to run a marathon, you need a running buddy. You want to go to war, you need a battle buddy. We found that you need TPs to succeed. And it is something that was not required in the 20th century. In the 21st century, you cannot succeed without it. And this is where, by the way, this is a picture of our leadership team. It's voted on every year. So there's 10 individuals this year. It usually goes up to 21. 21 I know is an odd number, so it doesn't quite work. We'll have to change that. Long history there. A lot of diversity. This is voted on by the employees, but it's a lot of diversity, and we're not talking about the little d. We're not talking about diversity in gender, diversity in skin color. We're talking about diversity of thinkers. Diversity of thinkers, and that is something you'll see also be critical to succeed in the 21st century. So let me start off by giving you a quick story of someone who we got to know pretty well. A guy named Wes Moore. So Wes Moore is an individual who we got to know well. He has a tremendous resume. He was a captain of a fairly large group in the Army. I think it was a platoon, or get all the titles wrong. Rhodes Scholar, White House fellow, has a show with Oprah Winfrey, 2-time New York Times best-selling author, and now is a CEO of the Robin Hood Foundation, which is one of the largest charities in New York City. I mean, tremendous resume. Wes is someone I got to know very well over the years, and Wes is an individual. He's black, raised by a single mother, grew up in a very, very poor and bad part of Baltimore. So one day, while sitting in New York, he's reading the paper, and he sees that there's a Wes Moore from Baltimore, who's black, single mother, living in a different part. He never met this guy, same name, bad part of Baltimore, who just got sentenced to life imprisonment. It's got to be a weird thing, no? Sitting there reading someone who sounds exactly like you with the exact same name, right? Exact same background of how you grew up, and all the success you have, and this person just got sentenced to life imprisonment. So we started corresponding with the West in jail, just writing letters. Over a decade of correspondence, and eventually went to go meet him in prison. And the most profound conversation the Wes I know had was to ask the Wes in jail, are we a product of our environment? And the Wes in jail, life in prison Wes said, no, we're a product of our expectations. Everyone told me I am going to be a loser. Everyone told me that I'm going to go on drugs, I'm going to do crime, and I will end up in jail. That is exactly what happened to me. The Wes I know somehow surrounded himself with different people. People told me you can be better than this. Despite all the constraints and all the circumstances, you can be better than this, and it's exactly what happened to him. When we first met Wes, he said, I don't know, it's unfair. I don't know how I succeeded and the other Wes didn't. And the interesting aspect about expectations, when we are children, you don't have a choice who sits closest to you. You don't have a choice of who you go to for counsel and for advice, for mentorship, for coaching. But as an adult, you do. You get to pick your friends. You get to pick your advisors. You get to pick your coaches. And that act of picking the right people will change your future. So I'll come back to this story of Wes Moore at the end. But we are a product of our expectations is what he learned. And that is in our control once you become an adult. Who you surround yourself with is in our control. David Rose runs one of the largest angel networks in New York City for the tech community. Angel networks is a term for investors who write personal checks into startups, into tech companies, mostly. They call them angels, but they can be devils too, a lot of times. But angel investors, he runs one of the largest networks, so sees just a lot of stuff. This was a talk he gave, and he said, any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st century. Meaning if you succeeded the way you ran in the 20th century, and you keep running that model, you're gonna fail in the 21st century. This story is a little bit embarrassing because I am Korean. But Korean Airways in the 1900s, in the 20th century, was known to be the airline with the worst record when it came to pilot-driven errors that led to accidents. Out of all the airlines, Malcolm Gladwell highlighted this in his book Outliers and talked about the hardest challenge for Korean Airways was the fact that they were struggling with their cultural legacy. In Korean culture, a senior person is senior and then there are junior people, and the senior person cannot ever show fault. They're always right, and they must show that strength. A junior person cannot disrespect or call out, even point out any flaw in a senior person. And that culture is so strong. And if you look at an airplane, what happens is these are the only two people who have a view of the front. In a plane, you're in charge of hundreds of lives. Everyone gets a side view. Only two people, the pilot and the co-pilot, get front view. And what occurs, and what occurred in fact in this accident when they dug in was this. The pilot sees something going wrong. These somethings are what we call NQRs, not quite right. It's not quite certain, but it's not quite right. And they're watching this NQR, but saying nothing for fear of looking incompetent or looking stupid. It's not perfect data. The co-pilot is seeing something wrong too, but dare not correct and speak up to the pilot, so they will actually kill themselves and the whole plane rather than speak up to talk about something that's going wrong. This happens so much. Even recently, in the last several years, Korean culture has had ships crash, taking hundreds of lives down. They've had planes crash, all down to the same phenomenon. 20th century organization design was designed to give one person authority, all power. There's a pilot and then a co-pilot. Imagine if you had co-pilot, co-pilot. Can you imagine families running where you have parent and co-parent? So I think in most families, the woman tends to be the parent and the husband's the co-parent. So the co-parent gets to play ignorance. Gets up, what do you mean diapers? How does that work? I don't know if I can feed them. What time do they eat? Like, what do they eat? What do I do afterwards? I'm just a co-parent. I'm not the parent. One person taking ultimate responsibility, the other one being subordinate to them. Leadership, we found in the 21st century, is a two-person sport. It takes two, and people always ask us, your co-CEOs, what happens when you disagree? You need one person to ultimately make the call. What happens when you disagree? When it comes to really important things with your children, what happens when you disagree? Does the parent just get to decide, and whoever's the unspoken co-parent just has to follow along? Of course not. You argue until you come to decision. You keep discussing. You look for alternative points of view. You need to come to a joint decision. This is one of the biggest challenges in the 20th century. Some of you are going to be sitting here, or another side of the ocean, thinking, this is not quite right, it's not true. Please challenge it. I want you to put your doubts in your head and actually think about being skeptical, because the 20th century model of one person needing to ultimately make the call, which is how it was built, has worked for hundreds of years. It has, actually. And so why change this? So as you spend the next couple days, I hope we throw a little kink that might not quite be as truthful, as good as you might think. Every single company on this list, they all have one thing in common. These were huge companies in the 20th century. Every single company went bankrupt. They were designed to succeed in the wrong century. So as they went into the new century, a lot of them, almost every airline, had to go into bankruptcy in order to redesign how they operate. You know, airlines profited from the lack of information. If you remember, when I was growing up, and it was you went on a flight the day before, right? If not the day of, I mean, you knew you were getting gouged, right? You want to go to California, or you want to just go to Boston from here? $1,500, sir. $2,000 one-way ticket. You're coming last minute. You knew you're going to get gouged, and you put your credit card up and took it as, I should have booked sooner. This is the price I pay. Well, with the information age, guess what? You can see every airline, what seats they have open, and you can go and get a ticket, sometimes for as low as $29 to $49. Tickets that they used to charge $1,200 to $2,000 because they could in the 20th century. Information in the 21st century is very different. Everyone's walking around with a phone that has more information than any company had, running McKinsey-driven studies going for 12 to 18 months. They can't match the amount of information one person's walking around with. And that's just coming from this. Forget about what's coming from what you're seeing, hearing, feeling, talking to other people. It has changed. And so the airlines saw that if they didn't redesign how they operate, they were going out of business. And in fact, they did go out of business. They had to go bankrupt to redesign before they came out to succeed again. This is our team at the CIA. The head of strategy at the CIA, as we work with them, said the greatest challenge we are facing as a business, frankly, is that our business environment is changing much more rapidly than our ability to adapt. In nature, this sort of thing leads to extinction. The most common phrase you've heard from every organization in every industry globally has been, we need to build adaptive learning teams or we will die. We will be extinct as a team, as an organization, as a company. Org design in the 20th century to move to the 21st century. In the 20th century, organizations were designed to maintain previous, often one innovation, protect that innovation and build and milk it for all it's worth. In the 21st century, if an organization is not redesigned for continuous innovation, they are toast. One innovation is not enough. In fact, two is not enough. You have to do it continuously, and you need the help of your entire team to do it. So how do you do this? So we'll go through some of the details, but organization design always comes down to two parts. There's hiring and there's environment, and the power of a selection process, like this big dude right here in the middle, is that not everyone gets to come in. This is professional sports. Amateur sports is different. Amateur sports is, thank you for coming, please be nice and fair, everyone has to take a turn, and that's how amateur sports runs. Most of us all work in some level of professional sports. The mission is critical. The mission must succeed. You must win the game. And you must win the game not once, but continuously. Because it's not about, you tried hard, good job. Thanks for showing up. I'm glad you got a chance to play and you got a chance to play, and I'm sorry we lost. It doesn't work that way. Jobs get lost, lives get ruined, and in your field, people die when you don't focus on the mission. But there are two levers to get this right. And there's hiring and environment, because most people, most leaders and CEOs focus obsessively on hiring. The belief is that if you hire correctly, the rest takes care of itself. I'm sure you've heard this phrase, right? 85% of CEOs will say we obsess on having, in fact, the right questions and the right hiring techniques, the grueling process, because if we hire correctly, the rest takes care of itself. If you have a rotten environment, every new hire coming in will rot with the environment. If you have an amazing environment, right, an elite, high-performing environment, but you could keep putting the bad hires in, the environment will rot eventually. You need to work on both. Now, as you work on both, the principles of one of the things you need to focus on are three things. It's kind of like three legs to a stool. The intentions, the programs, and then the technology to help make it scale. I know in some of the culture tours today, people kept asking about this question of scale. How do we take this kind of culture and put it in scale? You may not believe us, but we've seen it go as large as through the military and 2.2 million people. It's scaling, and it's scaling fast everywhere, but it takes all three if you want to. Most organizations, though, have spent more time in the last 15 to 17 years writing their intention documents. Documents about modernization of the workforce, future force, letters from the head of the Air Force, the head of the Navy, the president of the country maybe, in countries, talking about how we must change. And they edit this, and they rewrite this, and they come up with logos and slogans and ad campaigns. They are imbalanced and putting way too much in intentions. You need programs and you need technology. Now, I know in the military you hate the word programs because you're over-programmed. So yes, you need to dial down some of your ones that don't work, that have expired. But the reason we love the word programs is programs repeated and done over and over again eventually become products, technology products. You want to systematize into a machine what actually works manually first. And that's how you actually do it. So I'm not going to go into this full slide because there's a lot on here. This is talking about intent, programs, and technology, because in the 21st century, every organization we talked to said what used to work doesn't work anymore. But what we found interesting was this green plus sign everywhere on the programs, even on the technology. Everything in the 20th century, plus. Now, when I say everything, yes, some things you dial down, and some things you have to dial up slowly, but plus. I'll give you an example. When it comes to recruiting, we found interviews no longer work. It took us a decade to watch this happen. And the reason why interviews don't work, every form of every question is up there on the internet and how to answer it. And candidates are spending time memorizing, and you're hiring the ones who memorize the best. Now, there is room to hire because you need to have people who do their homework. That's a good trait. So you want to find that. Plus, you still need to screen for how they collaborate, how they're coachable. Can they grow from that point? Whenever we hire someone, we tell them we don't care and not as interested in you today. We care about you tomorrow, what you can grow to. You go through like onboarding. Onboarding is usually about these are the rules of the company, here's how you operate, and you're just shoving down things to memorize. Onboarding is the best time to begin their training, to learn and to grow. You know, they say for marriage counseling, people do marriage counseling when there's trouble. But you should do it before you get married. Right at the beginning, like days before you have your wedding, you should go to marriage counseling. My response was, what the hell? Why would you do that? Do you know how open-minded you are to all the challenges and troubles that you might face in the beginning? Later on, when you're having trouble, who wants to go see a marriage counselor? Later on, when someone's completely off track in how they grow and all their biases are coming out, nobody wants to hear it. They want to talk about what's my severance package going to be, what are you going to do for me? They don't want to talk about some of the impediments they're facing repeatedly. It's an opportunity you don't want to lose. Whether it's creating leaders, whether it's recognition is too much on who is the star performer. Recognition today has to be that plus the ability to collaborate and help others succeed. Team is more powerful than solo. You cannot play solo anymore. You'll find in promotions, most people are promoted because they're star players, or they just length of service. They've been around for so long. So the sure wisdom they collected then is the reason they get promoted. Now you need more. You need to promote leaders that do that, plus create more leaders like that. We'll talk about this much more tomorrow in the Leadership 360 session, where when you get promoted, people mistake and misunderstand what the organization is asking, what the enterprise is asking. You did a phenomenal job. Now I want a lot more of that. I want more. I don't care if you're a coder. I don't care if you're a salesperson, if you're a fighter. I want more, a lot more. So I want to scale what you've done. That's where you're getting promoted. So I need you to train more people on it. I need you to use more technology. I'll give you just a wad full of cash to help make that happen, but I need more. And that's where promotions are coming in. But the most important one, and this is where we rank through, right? And we put in over time, looking at ourselves, looking at every organization, what's the ROI? ROI in business is return on investment, right? Nobody doesn't have constraints on capital, on time, on people resources. So we're all hungry for payback. I wanted to put my energy and time in, but I want to know how fast I can get paid back. We found that recruiting and hiring 5%, onboarding 5%, promotions 5%, recognition 5%, performance evals 5%. PEMS is a catch-all for everything from physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. Spiritual is not religion, but giving. And mental is more technical skills training. Emotion is where all the soft skills of character and leadership fall in. And then physical is exercise, sleep, nutrition. Should cover this in the tour. The largest one comes in building a decision-making gym. I'm going to talk about that in more detail. A decision-making gym, 51% or more. That's the majority by definition. Meaning you can do everything else, you will still not have hit the majority of ROI. If you do everything lightly and do this the best, you're going to make money. And we found when we did this right, our revenues and profits, the KPIs, the key performance metrics that matter, tripled when we started to focus on this. A turnover, which was at 40% for 2 years, plummeted when we started to actually do this and went to single digits. Everything changed when we got number 3 right. So we'll spend more time sharing what's happening in this field. So Roger Martin is an individual we spent some time with. He is one of the experts in the field of strategy, right? Now leaders love strategy, right? McKinsey loves strategy. Roger spent 10 years with A.G. Lafley, who was a CEO of Procter & Gamble, very well-known individual, studying all types of organizations to understand how to build strategy. And they wrote a book. But in the course of doing the book and the study, this is what they found. CEOs worried of other big companies, this is before, strategy changed every 1 to 5 years. Some people still write 10-year strategic plans, some write 5, some write 3, some write 1, right? But who ever heard of writing a 3-month strategy plan? You don't do that. It's got to go out several years. And then what you produced as any organization was products and services. So everyone was running this way, but in the course of the 10-year study, they found it changed. CEOs of very large organizations worried more about 2 kids in a garage than anything else. 2 kids in a garage is what they worried about more. Through simple creativity and innovation, they could put big companies out of business. The financial banks are shaking at every possible new startup coming around that is threatening to put them out of business. That is trying to take the areas they have profit margins on and destroying it. And it's happening in field after field after field. Strategy changes every day. Now that sounds kind of crazy. Because it's not to say, by the way, you don't need to make a long-term strategic plan. You do. But you have to look to see the underlying assumptions you're making. The assumptions you're making in building your strategic plan, it's often wrong. The minute you print the plan, it's wrong. And as those assumptions are being challenged and changing, you have to change your strategy. There's a guy we know who was the head investment advisor for Legg Mason, big hedge fund, big fund. And he said to me something so profound but so simple. When I get new information, I change my opinion. What do you do? Do you know how many people do well, you know, we spent 18 months doing the research and gathering this. We wrote the strategic plan. Although new information is coming in, I must reject it, right? We thought about everything. No, but this is new information you didn't think about. No, but we thought about everything. I can't do it. Now look, I could look fickle. I could look like weak backbone if I don't stick to the plan that we kind of implemented across the whole company. But when assumptions change, new information arrives, you should be changing your opinion. And what you produce today is no longer products and services. Every organization is a decision factory. 261 Fifth Avenue, this building is a decision factory. We are producing decision makers. Every job is now making decisions. If you watch Iron Man, right? Tony Stark, the future, AI is coming on, right? Do you ever see him really type in the keyboard? Rarely. He just talks to Jarvis. He tells Jarvis what to do. He's making the calls. He's making the decisions. The coding is done by the robot. We have learned engineering, which is one of the hardest fields and the hottest fields to get into. I mean, everyone is shortage of engineers at this point. We have found we can teach an engineer to learn to code in less than 2 weeks. And we can make them as good, if not better, than engineers who went to school for engineering for 4 years, 6 years, including graduate school. 2 weeks. Technical skills can be mastered so rapidly. And the reason is this. User interfaces, we say UI, UX, user interfaces, but user experience. It's built to be so simple that the hard work is done by whoever made this. Drag and drop. I watched my 5-year-old, he's 8 now, but I watched him at 5 coding. And I'm thinking, he's coding, I was a computer science major, he's coding things that were more complex than what I could do as a computer science major at Tufts University, senior year. He's doing it at 5 years old by dragging his mouse and making images move around. I was like, oh my God. Because when I coded, you started with a black screen with green fonts and you had to go into ones and zeros and figure out how to make this thing move. You no longer have to do that. The technical skills, which I'm sure is happening in flying planes, driving ships, it's getting easier and easier and more intuitive. The user experience, the user interface, the decision making is the hardest part. So where does all this come from? Because if you're sitting here thinking, oh my God, we're so far behind, right? This is awful, we're doomed, right? We're going to shut down probably. Probably won't, but you might. You know, Congress is doing funny things. But if you're thinking all these worries, I want you to feel a little bit better that it comes from the origins of how education and work happen. The biology. If you understand the biology, you might feel a little bit better. That explains why we are the way we are. And so what's fascinating is this. Public school system got invented in the 1700s by a guy named King Frederick the Great. We learned this with the work we did with charter schools and public schools. And this is kind of crazy. You may not believe this, but this is actually what happened. Education 1.0. The principles of public school system was to drive 2 things, isolation and fear. And the reason was when they did that well, Work 1.0 created loyal subjects to the king. Kindergarten was the gardening of children. So why desks are situated the way they are to isolate students, why teachers change every semester so you don't build relationships, and then students fear teachers, teachers principals, principals superintendents. And when you build the entire program of public schooling with these 2 principles, you got the best loyal subjects to serve the king. That was Work 1.0 and Education 1.0. Well, 200 years later, a guy named Coverley updated that model in the US for the factory. And he updated it to include compliance and uniformity. Everyone had to do the exact same thing and follow rules. And that was created because you needed followers. You needed workers. If you have a factory like this, who needs someone to raise their hand and say, I have a bright idea today of how we should run things differently in this factory? Right? And someone else says, no, I have a different idea, a totally different direction we should take. No, they were all replaceable. In fact, if you look at the way the desks are, public school desks still look this way. And it came from factories. Factories was literally the training ground for public schools was the training ground. School was the training ground for workers in the factory to create assembly line workers. And the reason why you move from one subject to the next, right? You do math, then you do reading, then you work on art, usually art's removed, but then you work on something else. You're moving subject to subject, I have no clue how they integrate, how they play a role in each other. Doesn't matter, no questions. Just keep doing it. Sounds like an assembly line worker, right? That's how it was built. So we spent time with the top charter schools, in fact, early learning is fascinating, preschools. the amount we have learned of the future of where work is going from preschools. And the reason is preschools have the advantage, very similar to doctors today. These brilliant mothers who used to run 5,000, 10,000 person organizations, sometimes larger, now are in charge of 1 or 2 people. They take all that knowledge and power of information, research and whatnot, and influence and everything you can imagine they do well, and they pour into 1 or 2 people. And they pour it into preschool above all else. So preschool heads, I think, have the hardest job I've ever seen. You sit down and a parent, teacher, or any discussion with a preschool head, they have to be armed with every piece of information you can imagine. Do you ever go to a doctor now? Same thing. You meet the doctor says this and that. Someone pulls out, well, doctor, have you heard about this new drug and this thing? And you know what? I'm not sure that's right because I've read a research about that. Doctors struggle with this too. The patient seems more informed than them. So working with preschool heads, mentoring and coaching them while exchanging knowledge, Megan and I were to glean and pick up through that in charter schools what's happening in education now. The 2 principles occurring in the most successful programs have creativity and collaboration. And they go together because creativity, if you want the best kind, is a social process. It has to happen with others. And when you combine these 2 things, the word that will come up is usually a word that we all want more of, innovation. We must innovate or die. There's not an organization of every kind, even into a low-budget public school, that will talk about the need to innovate. We must innovate how we do everything, how we run the cafeteria, how we train teachers, hire teachers, how we run everything. We must innovate. And Work 3.0, when you do that right, what we found is you're looking for decision makers. Just like Roger Marr and A.G. Lafley found, the new job skill, like every job has in the world, is making decisions. And collectively, when you get a team of elite high-performing decision makers, you get adaptive learning teams. This is the biology of this change. This is a little bit of a messy diagram, so you have to update this soon. 20th century model to 21st century. I'll go back to in a second why 2015 was a critical inflection point that we found. Every day in that format, the hierarchy-based centralized decision making is something that produces great products and services, but it's very different from what you need today. Decision making is decentralized because whatever decision you make at the fringes, everyone has to make adjustments. They can't say, well, you told me to do this. Yeah, but I didn't know about that information you're about to face. Make the adjustments. Everyone needs to make the call at the fringes everywhere all the time. Adaptive learning teams, the creativity, collaboration, innovation, people need to make judgment calls. And what you produce is a decision factor. What we found in the last decade of helping every organization out there, 2015 is when we saw a real change. Before 2015, everyone called us weirdos, cultish. What are you doing? Focus on products and services. I mean, we got criticized up the wazoo, but starting in 15, they stopped criticizing us. We started to see intention documents coming out of the military that talked about I think it was the future force. The CIA head, John Brennan, talked about the modernization of the workforce being the most important thing. We started hearing this term junior leadership. What do you mean junior leadership? Leadership was always leadership. There's only senior and then everybody else. But no, there's junior leadership and the challenge of retaining them, and we're losing them, and how do we cater to them? It sort of felt like a millennial entitled thing. They needed to build entire programs how to bubble these millennial leaders and make them happy, or else they'll leave, and our future goes with them. We started hearing all these challenges. Josh Burson is one of the top research analysts in the human resource field. In 2015, January, he published a paper that talked about this change. He talked about what was happening was the word culture was somewhere on the list of CEO radars, but it was far down, maybe number 9 or 10 or even off of the top 10. In 2015, at the beginning of the year, it started to show up as number 1, 2, or 3 in the list of most important things for CEOs, as in the boardroom discussion, this soft thing called culture. And trust me, it was not about who had better cappuccino machines, snacks, or social events. It was more than that.
I just wanted to add one piece to that. We also started seeing some of the most senior, most competent people in their organizations moved from, the head of technology for the CIA, moved to the head of people. HR, what would be perceived as HR, to see some of these really high-powered, some of the best, if you will, players, competence, moved into the role of being in charge of their people. And that, I think, in 2015, we also started seeing and asking, wait, why is that? Because they're my most competent people. That's why they're in charge. And that's why they're with the CEO at the table in charge of people. Move from something that was revenue generating or protecting of their organization, move to be in charge of people starting in 2015. It was a huge change that we saw.
So as this change was occurring, one of the things that we started to see and look at was this. Most organizations have at least read or talked about the millennial change, right? This group that's coming up, and they're going to be the majority of the workforce in a couple of years, right? If not almost close to now, the millennial challenge. The problem isn't how many millennials we have. The problem is once they're put into powers of decision making. Once they hold decision making power, if you think you have problems now, wait till you see that happen if you haven't seen it already. Well, 2015 marked the year when the oldest millennial was 34. You know what happens in your mid-30s? You start to get promoted, just through length of service and experience, into leadership roles. And now suddenly, they're in charge. Not everything, but they get to make calls, decisions. And the fear of senior leaders, the incumbent leaders, was, oh my God, what are they going to do? Are they going to just destroy everything? Are they going to start replacing everything and start talking about paint on the walls? You know, how we need good colors, and we need like futons and ping pong tables, and we need all work from home. What are they going to do? Right? And what we found instead was not that. As they had a lot, you know, if you were ever a backseat driver, or if you ever actually had advice for people, when you see like a parent in the grocery store yelling at their child, and you're thinking to yourself, because you haven't had children yet, that's not how you do it, right? When I'm a parent, that's not how you do it, right? I would make them laugh, I would bring them right back in, and I'd solve this whole thing. I can't believe what a horrible adult that person's being. If you're not laughing, it's because you don't have kids. Just like driving, a backseat driver, right? Pay attention to that. Wait till you drive and realize in your hands and in your power comes a ability to keep everyone safe or kill everybody in the car. Once the millennial leaders started to step into leadership roles, they too got paralyzed. They too started to feel more and more inferior, and all the issues that all leaders have started to show up. Do you know how well I slept before I became a parent? I could literally sleep until 4 or 5 in the afternoon. Now I can't. And I don't know what's wrong, because nothing changed except I had kids. I'm worried about someone else's life. And once you worry about someone else's life, you can't shut your mind off. There are challenges in leadership that come, but 2015 marked the window when this generation that only grew up in the information age, that only knew this form of the world, started to go to be in charge. And there's when the problems started to accelerate. And there's when, up for the first 15% of this new century, the old design and model still worked okay. In fact, profitably for many organizations. But now we're in 2017 and nearing the end of it. If there isn't an organization that isn't feeling like something is really wrong, and we're about to get torn apart, well, you're like just not looking. It is happening all over the place. So, we'll go into decision making a little bit more depth of what it actually is, because it is also misunderstood. In fact, if there's one skill I think we all wish we got better at, is decision making. Wouldn't you love to make better calls at home, at work, everywhere? Better decision making skills. And in fact, anything that's a skill, the good news is it's like building muscles. The more you exercise, the more you practice it, your muscles get stronger. But like muscles, if you don't exercise and don't practice, it atrophies. This is not a do it once and you're done. It's a continuous process. So first, what is decision making, especially in the 21st century? Malcolm Gladwell talks about this. In the book, he talks about the planes. And when you have accidents on planes, that when you look at a movie, it looks like one single problem is why the accident occurred. But they found in the research that's not true. Accidents occur because it's an accumulation of many small problems. In fact, what they found was a typical accident involved 7 consecutive human errors. Now, some people say, well, I didn't make a call. Well, that might have been the wrong decision. Or maybe, no, I made 7 calls. Well, you know what? The wrong call was actually one of those in there. When you get 7 consecutive wrong decisions, you see accidents. When you look at football games, it's the fumble that's not that important. Everyone's like, oh my God, they fumbled, that's why they lost. No, they didn't lose because of the fumble. It's the downward spiral that occurs after the fumble. It's the 6 more errors or more they made after the fumble that led to the 7th error, and that's why they lose the game. 7 consecutive things going wrong, making wrong calls, despite the constraints of the environment and bad weather, everything. 7 wrong calls leads to an accident. We found the opposite to be true. You need 7 right calls, 7 consecutive right calls to actually innovate. 1 good call ain't never going to be enough. You need 7 or more. And 7, and the word that's tough is consecutive, because just staying still, time is going by, which means if you're not making the calls, you're oftentimes letting error go through. You need 7 right calls, and it's fast. If you're not used to high performance, it is fast how many calls get made. In fact, they say a CEO on average makes 100 calls a day, 100 decisions a day. Simply not responding, a look showing, wow, I really like this tea, is a call. Because everyone hears that, get more of that tea. 100 calls a day. And no organization wants anything but an A CEO. Just school math, 95%. You need to make 95 right calls consistently every day to be an A CEO. If you want A+, you got to get better than that. They say if you make 85 right calls on average, that you should be fired as CEO. 85, that means if you get 15 wrong decisions, which by the way, 85, oh my God, 80-20 rule, isn't that brilliant? No, you should be fired. No organization wants nor deserves a B CEO. 85 is the mark to get fired. They might give you a little room to get A- for a little bit, but you better bump up and trend to A or A+, or else they want you out. And we found, as an individual, you can consistently score a B. But unless you find a training partner, a TP, you cannot average 95 or higher score consistently. It is near impossible. So boiling all the insights we saw on decision making, we bubbled it up. Remember the baseball, the movie Moneyball, right? That Brad Pitt was in the movie, the book. 5 levels to decision making to help you kind of boil all the different thoughts and processes out there. Now, the most common one that people think about are these 3 steps, right? Ray Dalio from Bridgewater talks about this, one of the largest hedge funds, other groups. The first part of decision making is independent thinking. You need to put your independent thought out on the table. And then you need to invite healthy discourse. Let's talk about this. Here's my original thought, my creative thought. What do you think? You put yours on the table. Healthy discourse. We go back and forth, and in the process, we make the best call, right? We picked up a term from the military called the war room, right? Isn't that what happens in war rooms? Everyone's putting out their independent thoughts. Everyone's discussing, and then ultimately, decisions are made, usually by the president, but sometimes it's made collectively too, right? This is the 3 steps. We did this over and over again to realize something's not right. Because we tried fixing it at every level. Which, by the way, if you fix the wrong thing, is what we call addressing symptoms. Until you get to the root cause, nothing will fix permanently. So one way that people fix the symptom of not thinking creatively, independent thinking, okay, let's bring in an expert. Let's get some Play-Doh, some Lego. Let's hold a workshop, right? We do these creative workshops. We'll have a creative station. There's like waterfall coming down with plants, and there's like a box of Legos here. There's Play-Doh over here. Bring us back to preschool days of being creative, and we'll make people more creative. Well, I don't think that's worked for many people, at least not consistently for a long period of time. Then there's the feedback side, right? We need to get people comfortable with feedback. Let's bring in a feedback speaker. Let's run a workshop on feedback. Let's go through these exercises. Let's make some rules on how feedback should be done. Here's how you give feedback. These are the words you must use. And here's the words you must use to receive feedback. That landed on me a certain way, and that landed, go through all these processes. Doesn't work. So then, what do frustrated leaders do? They jump straight to the endpoint. Let's just come up with a thing called an MDMP, Military Decision Making Process, right? Every organization has an MDMP. They have something that, these are the steps to make a decision, right? Which is asking human beings. The most powerful computer on the planet is a human being and their brain. You're asking them, I want you to shut off your brain and just follow these rules, right? Don't use your judgment. Doesn't matter what information that's not accounted for is there. Just follow the 1, 2, 3 to maybe 300 steps, some of them have large ones, of how to make decisions. And we'll be fine. Well, how well has that worked out? It's not working. So we found these were symptoms. When we got to the root cause, these were level 3, 4, 5. The root was twofold. We found level 1 and level 2. When these two things were not fixed and addressed, none of 3, 4, 5 even mattered. So level 1 is gas. Gas is French for give a shit. If your people have no gas, it doesn't matter how brilliant your strategies, how much you want to do, nothing will happen. But gas is actually easier to fix and achieve. The harder thing was level 2. It's a term that Megan invented called no lying, hiding, faking. No lying, hiding, faking, which is the highest form of transparency. The highest form of transparency is no LHF. So we'll go into more detail on this. Innovation, as I mentioned, is creativity with others, collaboration. Innovation is no longer a solo sport. By the way, even when you think Steve Jobs and Jeff Bezos, you look back, you'll always see two-person leadership teams. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, one of the best examples, greatest investors of all time. Two-person team. What do they do when they disagree? They keep talking about it until they come to agreement. It's a team sport. Eric Ries got known for writing this book, The Lean Startup. There was a time when you had one innovation that could ride for decades. That's over. Continuous reinvention is crucial now. Otherwise, you're toast. David Rose mapped a study looking at Fortune 500 companies. Fortune 500 companies represent the largest, most stable organizations, arguably on the planet. What you're seeing on this study was this. First, the original Fortune 500 companies, 443 companies are no longer on the list. They fell off the list. And what these graphs represent is whoever makes Fortune 500 is falling off the list faster and faster than they ever were. You know, the largest company on this planet for the longest time was Exxon. Now they're not even in the top 4. It's all dominated by tech companies. And I'm not saying tech is going to be the best, but it's changing so rapidly. It's changing so rapidly, it's hard to even predict who's going to be in the Fortune 500. Jeff Bezos, arguably one of the best leaders out there when it comes to innovation, ruthless, right? Talk about an individual focused on mission. He spends 15 years building a print business, then actually builds a competing ebook business in 2 years that matches what he did in 15 years. He talks about the notion of being disrupted or being a disruptor. Who is going to kill me if we don't move? I got to kill myself before they kill me. In today's age, in the 21st century, if you are not a disruptor, as an organization, you are being disrupted. If you're thinking even for a second, which side do I fall on? I'll tell you right now, you're being disrupted. Disruptors know what game they're playing. They are paranoid, they're at this, and they're ruthless about this notion. Amazon, the size of Amazon, is one of the most disrupting companies out there. I saw a recent study that said close to 75% of boardrooms today in every industry mention Amazon for fear they might enter their space. That's a little crazy, no? Some board member would say, so, Charlie, Megan, what happens if Amazon decides to compete in your space? What would you do? That's a real discussion that happens in almost every board meeting, 70+% of the time today. So I'm going to spend more time going into level 2, because if you get level 2 right, it doesn't guarantee you're going to do 3, 4, 5 right, but I'll tell you, if you don't get level 2, I can guarantee 3, 4, 5 do not matter. So decision making and how it fails. No lying, hiding, faking. What is it? It's actually the highest form of truth, authenticity, leaving nothing unsaid. Facts, my thinking, my assumptions, my gut intuition, what you're feeling, you're sharing it with the team. Do you know how many people say, it's just an inclination, it's a thought, it's not quite thought through, so I chose to keep it to myself. That is no lying, hiding, faking. Then the other way, it's lying, hiding, faking. Jim Fadigan. Gail is here, who's one of Jim Fadigan's right-hand people. Right? Jim Fadigan's, we've had the privilege, by the way, in the last decade, giving and teaching, meeting some of the most amazing people in the world doing the most amazing things. So some of that work is kind of going to show through in what we've done. Jim Fadigan, he's 85 years old. He invented the Sesame Street characters. It's kind of cool. You know, Cookie Monster, Big Bird. You know, the idea that kids are scared of monsters, but when you add the word cookie, it suddenly becomes funny. Like, just crazy stuff. He actually was an Olympic athlete. He coached 7 Olympic gymnasts, I think to medal even. And then he went on to build the training centers for Kia and huge companies. But the last 20 years, he spent focusing on children's education in public schools, how the brain works. And he focused on helping 20,000 children in 100 public schools who started to, fall off the learning curve. They stopped learning. They were having trouble. They were getting all kinds of labels from schools that they're dumb, right? Terrible word to use these days, right? Stupid is like more insulting than the F word now, right? They went from there, and in a 16-week program, he was able to jump them back on course. In roughly 6 to 12 months, 20,000 kids jumped the full grade in math, in reading, and language. You're talking about the hardcore stuff, not just in drama and painting, but like in the hardcore stuff that everyone's measured on. So what did he do? He shared very simple insights with us, which we love. He said that our brain wants to be right. And when it's not, it withdraws. So there's a show I watched recently, kind of late on Netflix, Breaking Bad, right? It's about meth. The point is this, our brain is kind of like a meth addict. I want meth, because being right is meth. We actually get high. We get dopamine. We get high when we are right. And when we're not, it's like saying, hey, you're a bad meth dealer. That was bad, that's not a drug, that's sugar. And you don't go back to where you don't get meth. That's how it works. So has this ever happened to you? If you ever played politics and it worked for you, you succeeded because of this, right? Politics in different ways. If you ever played dumb and it worked for you, I don't know what you're talking about, right? No, I was never told that. If you ever told the truth and you got in trouble for it, right? For speaking up, for volunteering an incomplete thought and you got dinged for it. Well, guess what happens? We build bad brain habits. Everything green, I'm gonna keep doing more of, and everything red, I'm gonna stop. This done over time, not once, twice, hundreds, thousands of times, months, quarters, years, decades. You build a habit, and then you eventually go into, I don't operate any other way. Harvard, team of professors at Harvard did a 3-year study on the future of work, where it's going, and their thesis was this: work is going to be the next adult learning center. That you're not done learning from 3 to 21. The first 17 years or so of actual formalized education is not the real education. The next 40 plus years of what happens at work is your education, much longer. The reason why child psychology was such a big field, belief was that once your body stopped growing, roughly at 17, 18 or so, you're done, you're baked. Now you're trying to get the most out of this vessel that's been built. So you must fix it before that state, when they're like molding their brain. I mean, people talk about, well, if you don't learn language by 7, you can't learn language. I mean, there's so many crazy stats in child psychology. Well, we've spent time with the best child psychologists on this planet. And you know what they said? All of that is wrong. What they found is, yes, the physical body stops growing vertically, but grows sideways only. The mental keeps growing. And in fact, it is a never-ending journey of growth. And that growth, that next school is happening at work. So they went through and did all this study and then said, oh my God, could this actually exist? Then spent 3 more years going and visiting every organization imaginable. Google, Zappos, Netflix, all of them, to say, does the future of work exist? And they found just 2 companies. It's a company called Decurion in the West Coast and Bridgewater. And they wrote a white paper in Harvard Business Review about it. One of our employees reads it one day and comes to Megan and I and says, it's like they're describing us. We have no HR team. Everything to talk about we do. It's like they kind of wrote it about us. So we wrote in, and of course so did thousands of other companies. They call them DDOs, deliberately developmental organizations. Organizations built to develop and learn. And they said that wait, like thousands of companies reached out, we did too, and they basically said, nope, 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 nope. Eventually, one of them came and spent 6 months parked in our office, watching and watching. And after 6 months said, wow, they are the real deal. We became the third DDO, and then they wrote a book called The Number One Culture, which we'll give you a copy of at the end, along with several other books, if you like books. A third of the book is about us, about them just kind of interviewing and watching what they observed. And this was published, I think, in 16, at the early part of 2016. I would say this is outdated. There's so much more we've learned since then. But the book starts with this phrase. In an ordinary organization, this is the first paragraph of the book, most people are doing a second job no one is paying them for. In businesses, large and small, in government agencies, schools and hospitals, for-profits, non-profits, in any country in the world, most people are spending time and energy covering up their weaknesses, managing other people's impressions of them, showing themselves to their best advantage, playing politics, hiding their inadequacies, hiding their uncertainties, hiding their limitations, hiding. We regard this as the single biggest loss of resources that organizations suffer every day. The single biggest loss. Car accidents, texting and driving. I don't know if you know this stat. By the way, this is a 21st century problem. The average individual was not able to text in the 20th century. In the 21st century, texting and driving, reading email or text while driving is like very common, right? But did you know that 64%, nearly 2/3 of all car accidents in the US, as in 1.6 million a year, involve a cell phone, involve texting and driving? 2/3. We had a conversation with Bob Burke from the Navy. You know, Navy ships keep crashing, right? Every now and then. 4 in a row. We said, I think 2/3 occur because of this. Are you telling me in a ship with hundreds, if not thousands of people, nobody saw an NQR? Something not quite right? Of course they did. Teams and teams of people saw something not right, but nobody spoke up. And the minute someone speaks up, have you been in a meeting in anywhere where someone says something and you say, oh my God, I noticed something too? The minute someone starts, everyone starts volunteering what they're seeing. FBI SWAT teams, like most organizations, when on mission, they're great. They're probably not so great when they're off mission, but when they're on mission, they walk around as a unit. They will talk about everything they're seeing, everything they're hearing, but most importantly, they will talk about what they're feeling. Something's not right. I feel something's not right. I feel there's a sniper on the roof. I feel, because what that does is it alerts everyone else, and they start to also share. And feelings, it's the intuition. It's a soft skill. The human being is the best gatherer of data. There's no machine on this planet that gathers data better than human beings. We can see disparate sources of data and make sense of it in ways that computers still have a long ways to go. Everyone is thinking about AI. It's not even close to what a human being can do. The second job. Because by the way, I'm a good driver. I did Skip Barber race car driving school. I'm a really good driver. Most of us go on the road, think we're a good driver. How could that tiny little distraction make a difference, right? I remember my mom always said, when you drive, the problem isn't you. The problem is everybody else. Right? So mothers always say, it's never your fault, right? If I was on the road and nobody else is on the road, yeah, I don't have to worry about texting and driving. But the problem is we live in a world where you cannot avoid another human being. And in fact, if you try, they're showing up on your phone, and Facebook and Instagram and everything else, showing up telling you how great they're doing and how you're not. Their vacation's better, they're having more fun, they're getting into places you can't get into. Well, you cannot avoid another human being in the 21st century. You can try to stay as isolated and as introverted as you want. You're learning about what other people are doing and what they're doing better than you. You're learning about it everywhere. And that distraction, that second job, leads to 2/3 of car accidents with people who were approved by the DMV to be good drivers. So this is how it happens. This is one of the ways it happens, lying, hiding, faking. Whenever we start anything, a new business, a new project, an idea, it always starts with, this is a great idea, right? I mean, every great idea I get, usually in the shower, it's like an awesome idea. And the belief is that as it plays out, I'm going to get to the place where I'll be able to say, this is one of the things I am most proud of. Anybody who has a child is trying to have a child. Same thought, right? Oh my God, I can't wait to have a child. Because I'm going to look forward one day and say, this person, right? This individual is what I am most proud of, right? And parents say this. I've seen them say this at 3, and the child 5, at 12, right? And then suddenly it starts to quiet down. You don't hear it so much when they're teenagers. And I've heard, parents say some really awful things about their children, and I'm like, they really don't mean that. But it starts there, and you think this is the journey. It's not. The real journey looks like this. Underneath, it starts with, this is the best idea. Then you're like, this will be fun. This is harder than I thought. It's going to be a lot of work. This sucks. I have no idea what I'm doing. Then you hit this dark swamp of despair, and everyone tries to build some bridge to avoid this part, and this is where all hell breaks loose, right? And somehow, if you manage to traverse past this, you go into this, okay, but it still sucks. Quick, let's call it a day and say we're done. We learned something, right? That's the cop-out way to say, like, let's quit. Then, hey, wow, it gets to them. But what happens during this process of going into the swamp? Because the more you have declared how much preparation, how much research, how much I paid, and how thoughtful I was in coming up with this brilliant idea, you're going to lie, hide, and fake even more. The greater you have said it is, the more you're going to lie, hide, and fake. So now you've got some people in this room, but that's why I never share anything, right? That's why I keep all ideas to myself, because I know when this happens, the people who spoke up look like idiots, so I decide to stay quiet. Yeah, but that's not going to work so well either, because your idea will never get good. There's no collaboration. And you're one nobody will ever come to for help either. This is what happens. And this is the truth of almost everything we do. Someone said this, which I love. Everyone has an agenda. The difference between an honest and a dishonest person is the degree to which he makes his explicit. So I love this. We call this no lying, hiding, faking. And the agenda oftentimes manifests in ways that we don't actually deliberately lie, hide, and fake. It's now happening through our biases. So one of the individuals we spent time with was the individual from the CIA who led the research team that found Osama bin Laden. Kind of cool, right? And talked about the research they did on biases. And they said we have a list of like 200 different biases. Everything from outcome bias, expertise bias, stereotyping, blind stuff. There's 200 of them. And what happened when looking for Osama bin Laden was that everyone believed, this was like the United States, right? Not just the military. The CIA, the 19 different intelligence, everything imaginable, and the whole world looking for this one man. You can't find him in today's world? Come on, right? We're not that bad. We've got everything imaginable. Satellites, you ever see 24? They find these people on like the same episode. It's like, we should be able to find them. That was literally the discussion this person had. Said, how can we not find this person? You know the key to solving the catch of Osama bin Laden? They went back and said, let's find the team that found the Titanic. This sounds crazy, right? Because the Titanic had a similar thing. This giant ship that crashed, they knew roughly where. Where is the Titanic? We've looked for it forever, can't find it. And so they found the original team that found the Titanic and said, what happened there? How'd you end up finding it? And they said, actually, we had a series of assumptions that the ship broke in kind of 2 big pieces. In the movie, right? You see Leonardo DiCaprio? Broke and landed. They looked for 2 giant pieces together. But then said, what happens if our assumption was wrong? What happens if it wasn't 2 big pieces, but it was thousands of little pieces and it got scattered? And it went much further in small pieces than we thought. They expanded the radius and they found it almost immediately. Wow! Osama bin Laden. We had a belief it was in a certain place. They expanded the radius and they found Osama bin Laden almost immediately. This idea of our biases, our blind spots, it's so powerful. The mother of all biases is the confirmation bias. Confirmation bias goes like this. If you find things that confirm your belief, you're like so excited you were right. When you find things and facts that go against your belief, you're like, you know what? No, that can't be right because they got something happened unfair. They got an unfair, some way to discount that. But God forbid you find these facts that actually are new that falls in your belief. Wow, the data shows I was right. This is playing in our heads everywhere. As we go through, right? And this is happening. Can you see how the confirmation bias comes into play? The stuff that, like, harder than I thought. It's like, no one told me I had no budget. No one told me I have to work with this ragtag team. No one told me the technology has bugs, right? You start throwing out everything that's hard for you. Then comes the part of like, oh my God, I knew my idea was right. When you find anything, you're gonna find that in this process, this plays through. And what ends up happening for all of us is this. The second job, being in our heads, is actually playing a larger role in keeping you away from your primary job of making the right calls. And you're like, no, I'm a good driver. I can text and drive. No, you can't. 2/3 of accidents, people die because of texting and driving. We worked and spent time with the top neuroscientists in the world, brain doctors. And they did these tests studying people while scanning their brain and threw them all kinds of questions, and this is what they learned. When people lie versus tell the truth, telling the truth is easier. In fact, they found it takes twice as much energy to lie. So if you have a 60-hour week, which I think is probably still considered a fairly short week for most people nowadays, right? 60-hour week. 20 hours is spent doing your first job. 40 hours is spent lying, hiding, faking. 20 hours a week. Now you can never get this down to 0. But let's just say for argument's sake, if you trained and found a way to dial the second job, this lying, hiding, faking, by 50%. What would you do with 20 more hours every single week for 52 weeks? 20 hours. Spend time with friends, family, pick up a hobby, go work out. You could sleep more, you could take a nap. You could take a 20-hour nap if you wanted, every week. 20 hours a week, spent time doing this. Just, 20 hours a week. That, by the way, it's 40 hours you spend time there, you can gain 20 back. Even some of it back. This is what Bob Keegan and the team of professors at Harvard said is the single biggest loss of resources in every organization globally, every industry. It's what the same theme is showing up everywhere else. Lying, hiding, faking is very bad for you. So, how do we solve this? The last part here. Decision-making gym. Like anything, if you want to get better at something, you need to train. And in fact, we used to call it practice, but we're calling it training ground. And the reason is too many of our employees, to an outsider, say practice. People like amateur teams practice, right? Intramural sports has practice. The word training is done at a much high performance level. So we went from practice to call it training ground, and you need training ground because decision making is not a classroom learned thing. It can help you, but you cannot learn how to parent. You cannot learn how to drive a car just by watching videos, playing video games or reading manuals. You must gain field experience. You need to experience it, which is Charles Duhigg said, it's important they learn, they being millennials in this case, he said, to make decisions. They need practice ground. Then you need to know how you did. If you don't know how you did, how do you know what adjustments to make? Which is where feedback comes in. Then in the recovery process, you need coaching to help digest what is difficult feedback. Josh Waitzkin, he's the same age as me. He's a fascinating individual we met, spent time with. He became the world's chess champion at one point. So world chess champion. He's 44 years old, lives in New York City. He then went on, the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer is based on Josh Waitzkin. Pretty cool guy. So being the best at chess in the world is kind of cool anyways, right? Even once. He decides to change sports. It's kind of like an unusual change for a chess player. I tend to think they're kind of dorky. He decides to go into martial arts. And he wants to be #1 in the world in martial arts. And there's a sport in Taiwan called Tai Chi. There's a national tournament that occurs every 2 years, and somebody held the title for 9 years. 9 years straight. Josh Waitzkin, in 6 years, trains and learns Tai Chi and beats him and becomes #1 in the world. Oh my God, right? Chess player, Tai Chi. That sounds like, wow, right? That'd be like taking from the military, maybe ballerina, right? Ballerina, like it's that diverse a field, right? It's just, wow. But you know what's awesome when we meet people like this? We sit down with them and we say, you know what? We don't believe in superhumans. We're all regular people. What's the secret? I want to know how you did it. So he shares how he did it, which is awesome. He tells us, chess and even Tai Chi, like most sports in the world, it's a game of patience. You need to be patient. It's very much like poker, right? At the table, at the poker table, everyone's lying, everyone's bluffing. But he said, you as you, when you're away from the table, who you are will show up. So here's what he did. He took a black notebook and he would follow his opponents around. And he would watch them standing in the buffet line, wondering if they're tapping their feet and how impatient they were to go eat when they're hungry. He would watch and give them a score in patience. He would watch them in the elevator. How many times they pressed the elevator button, if they rushed in, rushed out, a patience score. And through this process, he beat his opponents in both chess and Tai Chi to become the world's best. So the insight we took away was, wait a sec. There are two insights here. One is, talk about performance evals or even self-awareness, right, for development. You can learn about someone by watching them away from the game, away from the mission, because the same person will show up everywhere. First insight. But the second insight, you could use everywhere else, something that maybe called the collateral work. You could use all the other stuff to train them. So we started to train our employees, started to give even executives of Fortune 500 companies little homework tasks, tiny rituals to do. You're an impatient person, which tends to be the traditional leader, right? Which is why it's so dominated by men. Highly impatient people, just in general. There are many impatient women too, but you should meet my wife. Highly impatient. So we said, we want you to do this. When you go to the elevator, you don't press the button. You wait. You wait for someone to come. You walk in last, and you walk out last. Just practice this for 13 weeks straight, every time. Megan has the opposite. She's more on so I'm overconfident, which is what they call arrogant by definition. She's over humble. We just shortcutted the terms if you don't like it. Insecure. So Megan does the opposite. You press the button, you cut through people, and you dart in, and I don't care if you step on toes, you dart out and say, I'm sorry, I'm in training. You keep doing this. One of the simple ways that we actually build programs is in meetings, 1 hour meeting, right? The arrogant individual, listen for 45 minutes, speak in the last 15. It's still very difficult for me to do. Megan, the opposite. In the first 15 minutes, besides saying my name is Megan, say something substantial the first 15 minutes.
I think I almost trampled over someone walking in here today. I thought, oh dear God, if any of the people from the military are here, they're not going to know why I'm just darting in to try to get there. And I would explain it here. I was training.
You was you. What we found was this. If this is you, right here, and people talk about this magic of matching people with jobs. If you got everyone to do the exact job at their grade level to do, how optimally the whole organization would run, right? That's what everyone's trying to do. The CIO asked for help to try to build this giant people-to-job matching database. And we said it doesn't work. And then they're like, well, how about like LinkedIn? LinkedIn's the biggest database of lies. Everyone out there puts what we have former employees. I'm like, you didn't do that. You were not head of that. But that's what resumes look like. People project higher, and some people don't. But generally, it's a lot of lies. If this is you, this is the job that you can do. Plus 10 would be a job that's very difficult for you. Minus 10 would be a job that's very easy for you. If you are given jobs that are plus 10 to you, eventually over time you will feel terror. If you get jobs that are too easy, you will get bored, eventually get lazy and complacent. So here's what happens though. Being a leader, I want to train the next leaders and train them. People try to use mission to coach them. The problem on mission is this. This is not an intramural sport. This is a professional sport. You cannot afford to underwrite the risk when it comes to mission. So you need your best possible player in there doing the best possible job, and there is no, well, I tried at least. I'm sorry the whole team died, and I'm sorry we had to let go of like half the company, but I really tried my best, and can you blame me for that? No, that's not acceptable. You can't underwrite risk up here. We found trying to train someone up here is like near impossible. It's like being in a single elimination game of world chess or playoffs or whatever it may be. You don't get to do that up there. And then trying to make the job easier is not so easy either. Trying to make it minus 10, if I make it minus 7, it's very difficult, which people try, right? It's what we call coddling. Leaders try and do I'm going to do the hard part for them and give them the easier part. And when they do it, it's like, yay, you did it. You ran the whole thing, right? Because you did +1, because I did the other 9 steps that you didn't even know had to happen. It doesn't work. This down here, everything that we call culture, collateral work, it's the stuff that we can actually afford to underwrite the risk. Now, some of the stuff sounds crazy, like recruiting, like onboarding, but it's still less risky than mission. We took everything down here, and then we underwrote the risk to give people the space to train, designed org charts, because we found when we train people here, which you're going to experience and see through the academy, it shows up here. The same person shows up there. And taking something that's -10, it's a lot easier to take something easy and make it more stressful. 2 ways to do it. One is speed, right? Deadlines faster, and constrained resources. You get less people, you get less resources, you get less time, you get less everything. Make it more difficult. And see what happens. Peter Gorman. So, by the way, up there, this is practice. Going to feedback. Peter Gorman is another individual we spent time with, amazing guy. We call him Doc. This guy is kind of cool guy. He invented the heart rate monitor. So you know when you go on the treadmills, Polartec, and all that stuff, the heart rate monitor. In fact, he has a patent on it where he gets 10% of everything they sell globally for 20 years. To give you an inkling of what that is, he gets a royalty check every week for somewhere in $2 to $4 million. Every week for 20 years. He's successful. He then goes on and built several other things, but one of the things he built was this new product called the OptoGate, which I think you got tested on this morning. It's a system that was taking the lens of the Hubble telescope that looks 2 billion light years away, or billion light years away, and lasers from ski racing, and it pointed at the human body looking at things that eye cannot see. And this technology has been used predominantly in the medical field and sports. It's basically a gait machine. As you walk, it just measures your gait. So, to give you an example of what he was able to do with this machine, he had 2 people. This is one of them, Michael. 2 people separately he met, just random strangers, who had different injuries to the brain. As a result of it, they got paralyzed neck down. They both spent close to 6 years doing rehab, the best possible rehab the country can provide. And was told you can never walk again. You cannot walk again. He took them, brought them into his office. He got them both walking in 90 days. 90 days. And one of them is now running a marathon. So, again, people call him the Jesus of Mayo Pack. The miracle of Mayo Pack, Jesus of Mayo Pack during college. My mom's a pastor, but I don't believe in that quite. So we went to him and said, tell me the secret. I want to know how you did it. He said, Charlie, it's actually quite simple. He's like, human beings, right? That's what he said. Human beings are wired to do the right thing. We are wired to self-correct, but we often don't know what is right and we do the wrong thing. If you injure your right foot, you know what we tend to do? We tend to hop on our left. We keep all the weight off. But if you want to get better, you have to put pressure on the right foot. And that's the only way you get better. He took them on the machine, and in fact, they could not walk, and he had them watch what he called a second screen. The second screen, which told them through the machine in real time what was the right and wrong way to walk. Now, given they couldn't walk, they had to have 2 people on the side move their foot each to show them what it looked like. 90 days, every day training that way, they started to walk by that. And now one of them is running the marathon. Meaning, we will correct if we know what's right. And the second screen is another fancy word for feedback. It's a mirror. In fact, we have asked some of our employees who seem to ignore and not look at feedback ever, just run a test. Go home and cover every mirror you have in your house. And try to just go one day without ever looking at the mirror and see how it feels. That's how we physically operate. We must look at the mirror somehow, right? At least once, if not a lot more. But when it comes to our mind, we choose not to. This is how important feedback is. When it comes to feedback, this is us. Here, I want to stand in the line, right? I want to find the person who's going to give me comforting lines. I want to know how I did in this presentation. I want to find the person who will most likely tell me, Charlie, you were amazing, right? Let's go find that person. Comforting lines is the line we stand in. The line that nobody stands in. And the line that is very hard to stand in And by the way, giving is far harder than receiving. Trust me, if you think this line and sitting here, what feels like a punch, receiving is hard, wait till you have to sit on the other side. It's like when parents gave us feedback, just, I wish you would learn to give it better, is what you kind of want to say to your parents. Wait till you're on the other side and see how difficult it is. Because there's a heavy, heavy cost to bad feedback too. This is very, very difficult. So I come back, this is the last slide to the end. The notion of coaching. Coming back to the fact that if you've ever heard a phrase that we are the sum total of the 5 people we keep closest to us, these 5 people know the truth about us. The 5 people that are closest in your life. They know the truth, but they struggle to tell you the truth. And the more oblivious you act, the more painful you show when you get feedback for the first time. It's so painful. Some of you may experience it this trip, and I apologize, but it's good for you, okay? It's painful. We found that in this age, you need the aid of technology to help make that happen faster. A known group giving you anonymous feedback is the power, is the magic. People say, I want feedback, so I'm going to go on the internet and ask people for feedback. Strangers giving you feedback is worthless. Brene Brown calls it the 1 by 1 inch of paper. The list of people's opinions you should care about should be able to be written on a piece of paper that's 1 inch by 1 inch. That's it. That's what matters. You want to talk to people who are in the arena. Who wants to get parenting advice for someone who doesn't have children? Just because they read the books, watch the videos. You want people in the arena, and those people matter, but we found of all those people, the TP, matters the most. If you find that one person, the go-to person you go to, in fact, you'll find for most of us, the closest person that we feel closest to is the one that gives us brutal honesty. You know how many times they'll say, like, I know this person will tell me the truth, despite how difficult it is. Come back to Wes Moore. Why the Wes I know? Rhodes Scholar, White House Fellow, show with Oprah Winfrey, captain of a platoon. All the success he has gone versus the Wes who's in prison for life. The difference of expectations. In the app itself, this is before we met Wes, you'll notice the score of 1, 2, 3, 4. And the word that's below it is expectations. Below, meets expectations, exceeds, far exceeds. Surround yourself and ultimately find that one person, your training partner, that expects more out of you than what you are today. You'll get there. Find the partner who expects less. It's like having a gym buddy that is bad for you. You know who they are. The days you're tired, the days you don't want to work out, you're not working out. Or so you find the right one, they will find a way to bring the fire in you to go work out too. Feedback is data from other human beings. In fact, it's data that can inform your decision.